No one ever asked the spare child what she dreamed of. They just assumed she'd settle. Josh's new car sat in the driveway like a prize from a game I hadn't been invited to play. Red, shiny, with a bow so big it nearly brushed the windshield. Mom's voice drifted out the open kitchen window, all honey and laughter. Turn the key again. Let's hear it purr. From my spot on the curb, backpack still slung over one shoulder, I watched the scene like a stranger in my own yard. Dad clapped Josh on the back, grinning like he'd just married him off. I didn't even know Josh had passed his license test again. The last I heard, he'd totaled Mom's old Subaru trying to text and turn at the same time. I didn't plan to go inside just yet. The warm May breeze carried a hint of charcoal and cut grass. Somewhere, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked into rhythm. At least out here, the air didn't choke me with expectations I never met. Eventually, I stood, brushed dust from my jeans, and headed for the back door. The front would have required smiles. Inside, the air was thick with cake and engine oil. I caught a glimpse of the table, confetti, soda bottles, a homemade sign, Josh's first step to independence. My name wasn't mentioned. It hadn't been in months. I slipped upstairs and dropped my bag by the foot of the bed. A message blinked on my laptop screen. My college counselor's reminder about tuition deposit deadlines. I clicked the browser open, navigating to the savings account Grandpa had set up years ago. Password, code, security question. What's your dream school? I typed it. The screen is loaded. Balance, $0.00. I stared, refreshed. Refreshed again. Same result. My chest tightened like a wire had been pulled too fast. I clicked the transaction history. The number stared back. $75,000 withdrawal, 3 days ago. Memo line, family support, vehicle purchase. Vehicle purchase. I didn't rush downstairs. I walked, slowly, every step deliberate, trying not to imagine how this could all be some mistake. When I reached the kitchen, Mom was slicing cake. Dad was licking the frosting off his finger. Josh was twirling the car key around his index finger like it was a joke. I cleared my throat. Where's my college fund? All three froze. The knife hovered over lemon frosting, like it had forgotten where it was supposed to go. Mom blinked. What? My college fund. Grandpa's account. It's empty. She exchanged a glance with Dad, then gave a dismissive wave. Josh needed a car, Ellie. He's got job interviews lined up. He's trying. That money was for college, for me. You're still young. You've got time, Dad said, grabbing a paper plate. I graduate next week. Applications were due last month. Mom clicked her tongue. We thought we'd talk to you about it later. You're good at math, right? Maybe a year off wouldn't hurt. Josh muttered, It's just money. I turned to him. You knew it was mine. He shrugged. Mom said it was family money now. And there it was, like my name had been erased from the will with a Sharpie and replaced by family. I tried to breathe. I tried to speak without sounding like a child begging for a toy she'd been promised. Grandpa left that for me, I said. He told me I'd be the first Dawson to finish college. Mom exhaled. He's dead, sweetheart. The living make the decisions now. I backed away before my hands shook in front of them. Upstairs, I packed the essentials, a sweatshirt, charger, notebook, the fountain pen Grandpa had given me before his last hospital stay. I needed air. Out in the yard, twilight was falling. The neighbors' porch lights began to flicker on one by one. I stood at the edge of the property, beneath the oak tree Grandpa had planted the year I was born. Across the street, Mr. Whitaker sat on his porch, as he always did this time of evening. He was in his usual chair, wrapped in a cardigan, a mug of something steaming beside him. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just nodded once, slow and firm. Storm's coming, he said. Sometimes the people who smile at you the most are the ones who see you the least. The morning after the car celebration, the house was still buzzing with leftover sugar and satisfaction, just not mine. I walked into the kitchen and saw Josh's half-eaten cake plate on the counter, a fork still hanging on the edge like it hadn't decided if it was done being used. Mom was on the phone. From her tone, light, casual, overly sweet, I could tell she was talking about the party, probably to Aunt Lynn. Yes, yes, he loved it, she cooed. Ellie, oh, she's just being quiet lately. Moody, you know how girls are. I slipped out before she noticed me. At the public library, the air was calm and blessedly indifferent. It didn't care that my family thought I could wait a year. The woman behind the desk was someone I recognized, Mrs. Cameron, white hair always tucked in a bun, cardigan with a cat pin, and glasses chained around her neck like they were something she could lose in a gust of wind. I approached the counter with a stack of college brochures I'd picked up the last time I was here. Good morning, she said, adjusting her glasses. You look like someone with questions. I gave a small smile, mostly about how to get into college without a dime. She blinked. You want the practical resources section. I followed her to a row of thin binders with names like Financial Aid Pathways and Independent Student Resources. I picked the one titled Legal Aid for Young Adults. That's where I saw it. The note about contesting a violated will. It felt like a thread I could pull. Back home, I printed out 2 applications on the ancient printer in Dad's home office. He passed by just as I hit print and frowned at the whirring machine. Don't waste ink, Elle. We've got bills this month. It's for college, I said, not looking up. We've talked about this, maybe next year. No, I said firmly. You talked. I listened. He looked at me for a beat longer than usual, then sighed and left the room. At dinner, they served pot roast. It was Josh's favorite. I hadn't seen my favorite dish on the table in years. I ate in silence while they talked about tire prices, Josh's upcoming interview at the auto shop, and whether they should repaint the front porch. Nobody asked how I was. Afterward, I rinsed my plate and went upstairs. My notebook was waiting. I opened it to the back where I'd taped Grandpa's letter from last year. His birthday card, really. The last one he ever sent. Ellie girl, I hope this year takes you closer to your dreams. Use the tools I left you, and don't let anyone tell you what you can't become. I pulled out a pen and started writing. June 3rd. They used my future to finance Josh's next mistake, but I'm done waiting for permission. The next morning, I found a small snack bag on my desk, yogurt and 2 oatmeal cookies. No note, just there. I glanced into the hallway. Josh's door was cracked. I didn't knock, just walked past. Later that afternoon, I walked past Mr. Whitaker's house on my way to Millie's diner. He was pruning a small rose bush near his porch. I nodded. He nodded back. That was the extent of our communication. Inside Millie's, I sat at the same counter stool I always chose. Millie herself, gray bob, thick southern drawl, apron with more buttons than cloth, poured me a cup of decaf without asking. You look like someone carrying a heavy load, she said, setting down the cup. Want to swap it for a slice of cherry pie? I smiled genuinely, for the first time in a while. Only if it comes with no judgment. Sugar, she said, already reaching for the pie server. Judgment costs extra around here. I scribbled notes in my journal between bites, drawing a rough map of possible next steps, contact legal aid, talk to Collins Law, Grandpa's attorney, and, hardest of all, confront Mom again. When I got home that evening, I walked in just as she was folding laundry. We need to talk, I said. She didn't look up. If it's about the money again, Ellie. It is. She dropped the towel, slow and deliberate. Do you really want to turn this house into a courtroom? I just want what was promised to me. She walked toward me, all composed of rage. We've housed you, fed you, clothed you, on our dime, for 18 years. You think a fund makes you independent? Try paying for the heat next winter. My voice didn't shake. Grandpa's will didn't say anything about conditions. She scoffed. He was a sentimental old man. And you're not? Her face turned hard. We're done here. I nodded. Not yet. The next day, I printed the form to begin the process of will enforcement. I didn't know exactly what would happen next. I only knew that I was done asking, done hoping. I'd started building something different, a wall between what they expected and what I was becoming. When I walked outside that evening, the sun low behind the rooftops, I found Mr. Whitaker crouched beside his mailbox. He stood slowly as I approached, brushing dust from his knees. In his hand was an envelope with my name on it, typed, not handwritten. "Delivered here by mistake," he said, voice calm. I took it. The address was mine, but the return label was from Collins and Whitaker Law. I blinked, confused. "You might want to read that one. It has your name, not your brother's. You can survive betrayal. But surviving the silence that follows, it takes a different kind of strength." The silence came in waves. After my confrontation with Mom, it spread through the house like smoke. Thick, invisible, inescapable. No one said good morning. No one asked how my day was. Plates clinked against the kitchen sink. Drawers slammed just a bit harder than necessary. Even Josh, who usually found something idiotic to blurt out during dinner, had grown quiet. The envelope Mr. Whitaker handed me sat unopened on my desk for 2 days. I kept circling around it like if I touched it, I'd start a fire I wasn't ready to tend. But fires don't wait for readiness. They burn when they're meant to. When I finally tore it open, it was a formal notice from Mr. Collins, the attorney who handled Grandpa's estate. It confirmed my right to the $75,000 per the will and stated that, if needed, his office would pursue legal enforcement. I stared at the neat typeface for a long time. Somehow, seeing it in print made it real in a way that all my arguments hadn't. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being unreasonable. Grandpa hadn't just loved me. He'd believed in me. The day I told Mom I was going to take legal action, she laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Ellie." I hated when she used my full name. It always came with a chill. "You think dragging your family into court is the answer?" I didn't flinch. "It's not about court. It's about being heard." She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "And who's going to pay your lawyer? Your magical dead grandfather?" "No," I said quietly. "His old friend." That shut her up for a beat. Later that night, I heard raised voices in the kitchen. Dad, for once, wasn't silent. His words were muffled, but I caught enough to know he wasn't pleased with how things had gone. That made two of us. The next morning, I found my suitcase by the front door. "You're 18, Mom said, not looking at me. "You want to be independent? Go ahead." Josh stood at the top of the stairs, watching like he wasn't sure whose side he was on. I didn't wait for him to figure it out. I zipped the case, grabbed my backpack, and left. I didn't have a plan. Just a name, an address, and a memory of kindness. It started to rain halfway down the block. One of those early summer showers, quick and cold and full of sharp reminders. I kept walking. By the time I reached Mr. Whitaker's house, I was soaked through. My hair clung to my neck, and my sneakers made little squishing sounds with every step. I was shaken, but not from cold. He must have seen me from the window because the door opened before I knocked. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a towel and stepped aside. His home smelled like old paper and warm cedar. Books lined every wall, and the furniture was heavy, soft, and worn in all the best places. A lamp cast a soft glow in the corner, and a kettle whistled from the kitchen. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said, gesturing. "There's a dry sweatshirt on the hook. It might be big." It was, but it was clean, and it smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon balm. When I came back out, he was pouring 2 mugs of tea. "Chamomile better than whiskey on nights like this," he said. We sat in silence at first. The tea warmed my hands, then my throat, then the place behind my ribs that had been locked up for too long. "You look like him," he said finally. "My dad." He shook his head. "Your grandfather. Howard had the same stubborn set to his mouth when he was about to do something brave." I stared into my cup. "He's the only person who ever believed in me." "I'd argue with that," he said, setting his mug down. "But I think you already know." I didn't know if he meant himself or Grandpa. Maybe both. I didn't know who else to come to. "You came to the right place." He stood and disappeared into a room off the hallway. When he returned, he was holding a small wooden box. Inside was a pen. Not just any pen, a fountain pen with a dark green barrel and Grandpa's initials carved on the side. "He left this with me, said to give it to you when you stopped asking permission to speak." I took it, running my thumb along the engraving. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Good," he said. "It means you understand what's at stake." I looked around his living room, the quiet order, the warmth, the way the rain tapped against the windows like an old friend. "I don't know what comes next. You don't have to know where you're going. Just don't stand still. They called him strange, said he talked to birds and read outdated newspapers. But that night, he handed me a dry towel and called me kid. I woke up to the sound of a spoon gently stirring in a ceramic mug. Mr. Whitaker was already in the kitchen, moving with the kind of quiet rhythm I associated with Sunday mornings and old radios. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world smelling of wet earth and old leaves. "Sleep okay?" he asked without turning. I nodded, rubbing my eyes. "Better than I have in a long time." "Good," he said, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "No sense in starting a war on an empty stomach." I looked down. Scrambled eggs, toast with blackberry jam, and a side of something that looked suspiciously like corned beef hash. He sat across from me with his own plate and unfolded a napkin like it was part of a ritual. "I've been called worse than strange," he said between bites, "but it's never stopped me from seeing what needs to be seen." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I took a sip of tea. "You know," he continued, "your grandfather and I met in the Navy. Both of us thought we'd be mechanics. Ended up decoding radio chatter in a basement for 3 years instead. He was the only one who could make sense of chaos." My chest warmed at the thought of Grandpa in his youth, strong, sharp-eyed, brave. It made sense that the man who taught me how to wire a lamp from scraps in the garage used to listen for patterns in static. "He didn't like many people," Mr. Whitaker said. "But he liked you, enough to leave me something." He pushed a file folder across the table. Inside were clippings, copies of emails, text threads, and most surprisingly, screenshots of a Facebook post Mom had made weeks ago, bragging about helping her son take his first step into independence, with a photo of Josh and the new car. Right beneath it, a comment from someone named Carla. "Wasn't that Ellie's college fund?" Mr. Whitaker tapped the folder gently. "I've been collecting these for a while." "Why?" I asked, startled. He leaned back, eyes soft. "Because I owed your grandfather, and because I don't like bullies who think they're above the rules." I swallowed hard. I didn't think anyone noticed. "I notice a lot of things," he said. "Like how you always wait for everyone else to leave before entering a room, or how you take your coffee black, but never drink more than half. That tells me a lot." I blinked, unsure whether to be impressed or uncomfortable. He pulled out a yellowed envelope next. "I also found this in your grandfather's old lockbox." He handed it to me. Inside was a handwritten note dated just weeks before Grandpa passed. "Ellie, I know your mother sees the world in numbers and your father in silence. That's why I wanted someone else to be watching." My hands trembled as I read. "I didn't think you knew him well," I said. "Oh, we knew each other well enough," he replied. "Well enough that when he asked me to keep an eye on things, I said yes without asking why." The rest of the day passed quietly. I stayed in the living room, reading through legal guides and circling words I didn't fully understand. Mr. Whitaker brought out an old chess set in the afternoon. We didn't play, but he let me fiddle with the pieces, placing knights where pawns used to be, imagining strategies I didn't yet know how to execute. At one point, I asked, "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at me, long and thoughtful. "I think," he said slowly, "that there's power in refusing to stay quiet, especially when silence benefits the wrong people." That night, I sat at his desk and opened my laptop. The internet was slower than I was used to, but it worked. I typed an email to Mr. Collins and attached everything Whitaker had given me. The subject line read, "Request to proceed." When I clicked send, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. As I closed the lid, Mr. Whitaker walked in holding a small box. Inside was a different pen, sleek, simple, with a dark brass clip. "He gave me two," he said. "The green one was for beginnings. This one's for when you're ready to take back your name." I took it gently, unsure what to say. "I've watched a lot of people fold under pressure," he added. "You didn't, that counts." Outside, the wind stirred again. Leaves rustled across the porch, and somewhere a storm cloud growled on the horizon, deciding whether to return. "You don't have to know where you're going, just don't stand still." They always thought I'd crumble in a courtroom, but kindness walks quietly, and sometimes it walks beside you. I sat on the narrow bench outside the county courthouse, my palms pressed against my knees, trying not to bounce them. My best clothes, black slacks, and a pale blue blouse, still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon balm from Mr. Whitaker's closet. I'd tried to iron them with a damp washcloth and a tea kettle. The result was respectable if wrinkled. Mr. Collins arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled hearing, briefcase in hand, glasses fogged from the sudden humidity. "You look ready," he said kindly. "I'm not sure I am," he smiled. The people who ask that question usually are. The room they let us into wasn't dramatic. No high-backed judge's chair, no banging gavels, just a round table, some folders, a pitcher of water, and chairs that creaked. It felt more like a parent-teacher conference than a legal proceeding until my parents walked in. Mom wore a pressed floral blouse and that tight-lipped smile she saved for when the neighbors dropped by. Dad looked like he hadn't slept, eyes shadowed beneath the glare of courtroom fluorescence. Josh wasn't with them, though I hadn't expected him to be. They didn't look at me. Mr. Collins opened the meeting with a polite but firm overview of the will. Howard M. Dawson clearly stated that the sum of $75,000 from his liquid estate be allocated solely to the college education of his granddaughter, Ellie Dawson. Mom exhaled through her nose like she'd been holding her breath too long. "We are her parents," she said, her voice measured. "We made a financial decision that supported the family as a whole. My son needed a car to get a job." "And your daughter needed tuition," Mr. Collins replied evenly, "which was the specific intent of the funds." Dad cleared his throat. "We assumed she might delay school." "She didn't," I said quietly. Mom's eyes flicked to me, sharp as glass. "This is unnecessary. We could have worked this out at home." "You tried," I replied. I wasn't heard. There was a long pause. The air conditioning clicked on, and one of the light fixtures buzzed faintly. Then the door opened again. Mr. Whitaker stepped in slowly, wearing a suit that looked like it had been ironed by time itself. He nodded at me, then addressed the room. "I believe I can provide some clarity," he said. The mediator allowed it. Mr. Collins looked surprised, but said nothing. Mr. Whitaker took a folder from his inside pocket and placed it gently on the table. "In here," he said, "are documents from Howard Dawson. He entrusted them to me before his passing. Photocopies of his final wishes, notes on each asset, and a signed letter confirming that the funds in question were to be used for Ellie's college education only. He was concerned this would happen." Mom opened her mouth, then shut it. Greg, Dad, leaned forward. "You're not family. Why do you care?" Mr. Whitaker met his gaze without blinking. "Because sometimes the people who care the most aren't related by blood." The mediator reviewed the papers silently, nodding now and then. Mr. Collins leaned toward me. "If we settle now, we will avoid a formal court order. It will still be enforced, but with less fanfare." I nodded. I didn't need fanfare. I needed tuition. Greg rubbed his forehead. "We don't have 75 grand, not all at once." "There are structured options," Mr. Collins said. "Monthly payments, direct tuition coverage, but the total amount must be honored." Mom looked like she wanted to argue, but Greg cut in. "I'll do it." She turned to him. "What?" "I'll pay for it, however long it takes." He looked at me. "I'll make it right." Something cracked open in his voice, and for the first time I believed him. Greg turned back to the mediator. "Just make sure it goes to her school, not her hands. Please." "That can be arranged," Mr. Collins replied. As the session ended, the mediator concluded that my father would cover my tuition and related expenses directly until the full amount of $75,000 was satisfied. If my needs didn't meet that sum, the rest would return to the estate. I didn't know how to feel: vindicated, relieved, exhausted, probably all of it. As I packed my papers, Mr. Whitaker leaned over and whispered, "He came through." I nodded. I wasn't expecting him to. "You gave him the chance." Mom walked out without a word. Greg lingered, then stepped close. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said. "I'm sorry. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was something." Outside, the sky was clear and blinding. I blinked in the sun, stepping onto the sidewalk. Mr. Whitaker stayed behind to shake hands with Collins. I stood there for a moment, caught between the end of something and the beginning of something else. That's when I felt the tap on my backpack. I turned to see Josh in his work uniform, oil-stained polo, name stitched across the chest. He didn't say anything, just handed me a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it after he walked away. In his messy, tilted handwriting, it read, "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I hope you make it out." Somewhere between leaving and arriving, I realized I had already begun. The college dorm was smaller than I expected, with chipped white walls and a view of the student parking lot. But to me, it was a palace. My half of the room smelled like clean sheets and vanilla, with a desk that had never been used and a window that let in the kind of light you could write under. I taped Grandpa's photo next to my lamp, the one where he wore his gardening hat and winked at the camera like he knew a secret. Next to it, I placed the pen Mr. Whitaker had given me, tucked into an old mug that once held chamomile tea and rainy night promises. The first week of classes went by in a blur. Syllabi, names I forgot instantly, hallways that smelled like floor wax and stress. But I showed up to every one of them, early and ready, because I had earned that seat, not by luck, not by favor, but by refusal. Dad had kept his promise. The tuition had been paid, the dorm fee, too. No fuss, no conditions, just a monthly deposit that arrived like clockwork, like rain after drought. He didn't write anything in the memo lines, but I knew. I knew because I saw the effort in the silence. Josh had texted me once a picture of his new work boots and the words, "I'm trying too." I replied, "Good. So am I." Mom never called. I started tutoring calculus at the library 3 evenings a week. It wasn't official, just a couple of students who heard I was good at numbers. I liked it. There was something peaceful about watching confusion melt into clarity, about using my mind for something that didn't just benefit me. One afternoon, the head librarian, a thin man named Bernard, who wore bow ties unironically, asked if I'd consider volunteering as a peer mentor for first-year students. I accepted without hesitation. That same day, I received a small package from Mr. Whitaker. Inside was a white ceramic coffee cup with faded blue trim. A sticky note was attached, to Ellie, who remembered. I held the cup in my hands for a long time. It wasn't just any mug. It was the one Grandpa used whenever he came over to Whitaker's to play chess on Sundays. I'd seen it in old pictures. I hadn't even known it still existed. That night, I sat on the windowsill of my dorm, watching the wind rustle through the red and orange leaves on the maple tree outside. Fall was coming quickly now, and for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the cold. A few days later, I gave a short talk at an orientation event for new students. Nothing fancy, just 5 minutes about what it meant to advocate for yourself. I didn't tell them my whole story. I didn't need to. I just said, sometimes the ones you overlook are the ones who never forget. The room went still for a beat, and then came the quiet nods. A few hands clapped. One girl near the back wiped her cheek. That was enough. That weekend, I took a walk to the edge of campus, past the rows of townhouses and tiny cafes, until I reached a spot I hadn't been to since I was 10. It was a little hill that overlooked the river, not far from where Grandpa once took me fishing. I sat there for a while thinking about all the small things that led me here, the withheld meals, the tight smiles, the closed doors, but also the open ones, the unexpected kindness, the people who stayed silent not because they didn't care, but because they were waiting for the right moment to speak. Before heading back, I stopped at Millie's Diner. It looked the same, neon sign buzzing faintly, smell of grilled onions and cherry pie curling out the door. Millie herself was behind the counter talking to a customer in a blue vest and knit cap. She looked up, smiled, and nodded. I took my usual stool, the one near the corner under the dusty window. The laminated menu was still sticky. I didn't need to read it. Without a word, she poured me a cup of coffee and set it in front of me. "That's your table now, honey." I didn't set out to become strong. I just refused to stay small. Somewhere between rainy porches, borrowed coffee mugs, and courtrooms that smelled like old carpet, I found my voice and learned how to use it. Kindness doesn't always come wrapped in praise or applause. Sometimes it's a quiet man with tired eyes and a soft chair who simply sees you when no one else does. And when we stop judging people by the noise of their past, we finally begin to hear the music of their heart. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps there's someone in your life who just needs to be noticed. Even the smallest kindness can echo louder than we think.